Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Matt and Tim talk to advanced tree collector Lucas Dexter.
Hey guys, welcome to the MrMaple Show. We've got a fun one for you today. We've got Lucas Dexter here. We're going to be talking about recently book he was featured in and also just tree collecting in general.
Yeah, I'm real excited. Lucas Dexter, I've known him on Facebook for quite a while. I was looking, I think we've been messaging back and forth, for over 15 years. We've had multiple conversations, but never actually got to meet Lucas Dexter yet. And it's kind of cool to bring him in here for the first time on one of our Zoom interviews.
That's what we like doing on this podcast, is having plant conversations and letting you guys be a part of it. So Lucas, I appreciate you hopping in here today, man.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be part of the team.
Hey, we love doing this, and I love what you're doing. I'm a fan. I've followed your group, Advanced Tree Collectors, for a while. I know you're someone who generally promotes horticulture and has a lot going on right now. Tell us a little bit, we'll get into the book, but tell us a little bit about how you got into horticulture.
Yeah, thanks. So my dad was a tree collector and still kind of is a tree collector. And we're by our trade, we are a landscape installation company. And so the two can go hand in hand. And really what happened was when I bought my first house, about 11 years ago, my dad gifted me a Japanese maple seedling that he had a Rito Nishiki that was probably 30 years old, big full-size tree. And one of the seedlings underneath it came up almost all pink. It was beautiful. And because it was so heavily variegated, after 10 years, the seedling was about a foot tall. And they dug it up and put it in a pot for me, and they gifted it to me with my new home. And I was just super honored. He named it after my mom, Alice, who's still alive and well, and they're still married. But I just cherished this tree. It was so nice of him to do this. And that first summer I killed it.
Oh, no.
And yeah, it was terrible. So I kind of obsessed over, how could I, if I find another one, how could I preserve the genetics? How could I keep it going? How could I make copies of it? How could I make more of them? And, very quickly in research, you find out the best way is grafting and to kind of really hold those genetics. And so I searched for more of those seedlings under that tree for a couple years probably, and I couldn't find anything near as magnificent as the one that we lost. And so I ended up going and getting trained in grafting, and just in case I did find one. And then once you start grafting Japanese maples, look out, you're going down a rabbit hole.
That's when the collecting goes to another level.
Yeah. And then also you find out too, or at least I did, that leave it to the professionals. The success rate of grafting yourself is really, at least for me, I never got to 100%. And so, I just leave it to the pros now. And
hey, it can be really humbling on any given year. You find you don't get cocky when you're producing trees. Like, they will humble you. They'll teach you lessons. Nature changes. Yeah. You're like, wow, I'm doing great. The next year it's like, whew, and not so much.
And then there's, for some reason, you talk to all the grafters around the country, and you normally get 85% on Twombly's Red Sentinel, but everyone across the country last year, East Coast, West Coast, for some reason got like 30%. And you're like, what was going on
with that one thing?
Yeah, and it's just that one cultivar, everyone across the country, and you're just like, okay, there's a lot of things here. The more you learn, you don't really know too much about what's actually going on.
I love that side of it, though. I love grafting. I love the production side of it. That's one of my favorite things. I was down at the late, great Pat Dye as a Coach Dye one time, and there was like 5 or 6 grafters, and they were having like a grafting brag contest. And so I wasn't saying anything, but Coach, one guy's like, I get 97.2, and they were really oddly specific numbers. And they're like, I get 88.7%. And Coach Dye's like, what percent do you get, Matt? And I was like, you're not going to believe it, coach. I got 130%. He's like, how'd you do that? I said, a bunch of trees fell over and growed together. Everybody's a great grafter. Talon Buckles has a good quote. He says, everybody's a great grafter if they get to clean up the nursery before you visit. Hide all the no takes. Right.
But on top of that,
I've been to Coach Dye's actually. That's a cool place.
Oh yeah, you have to swing by here if you're in North Carolina. I know you're all the way out in California, correct?
Yep.
What part of California are you gardening in?
So I'm in Napa Valley in northern California. It's about an hour and a half north of San Francisco.
Oh, cool.
It is just beautiful out here. The growing season's really long, and I love it. I mean, the temperatures lately, especially this past summer, where we were over 100 degrees for 8 days in a row, it's the Japanese maples are finding more comfort and deeper shade.
Mm-hmm.
So
California is such an interesting place. It's really, it breaks all the rules. It's an interesting, we talk about maples and stuff for zones 5 through 9, but California is one of the more interesting places to garden because, certainly there's areas in California that don't get below 45, but really don't get above 85. So what heat index and zone is that, right? That might be a zone 10, but it's not really a zone 10 for what we think of, the East Coasters, we think of zone 10 like Miami. It's like, wow, it's not going to be like that.
Yeah. So Aaron Dragseth, I think is how you pronounce his last name, so he's not too far from me.
Okay.
He's like an hour south of me, and he's in a marine layer area where it doesn't get very hot there, but it doesn't get anywhere near freezing. So he's zone 10, I'm zone 9. I get about 25 degrees hotter than he does.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So the zoning really is all based on frost levels, right? And so it doesn't really calculate that I'm so much hotter than he is.
We need a USDA index that kind of takes into consideration temperatures ranges. And so I even have a lot of quarrels with the new zone map because they'll just talk about the coldest it gets on average. Well, that doesn't really help people if you're growing a zone 8 plant and a zone 6 and your average is not really but a zone 8, but you can get -5. That kind of changes things.
Yeah, and the plants I find are less concerned with the average than they are the extremes, right? And it's the extreme cold snap that's going to really do the damage or the heat.
Right. I find maples are really adaptable. I mean, we list them zones 5 through 9, and obviously that doesn't really matter in California because there's a lot of zone 10 places in California. But for the East Coast, it makes a lot of sense to kind of give them that kind of average because generally once you get past zone 9 on the East Coast, you're getting a little too hot and humid. But
yeah.
So you talked about your passion for Japanese maple, sort of where that came from. Where did your passion for gardening come from?
So as a kid, I think the first gardening memory was without telling my parents, and I was probably 7 or something. And I grabbed popcorn kernels. I put them in a Ziploc bag. I must have seen it at school, or maybe we had a school exercise. And then I germinated them with a wet paper towel above the refrigerator. And then I went out in the garden. I planted them, and at one point, my mom came in the house and was like, "There's corn growing in the garden. What's going on here?" I didn't plant any corn. I was like, "Oh yeah, I did." And that was kind of one of my first memories. So I've always really just liked the whole concept of growing something. It's just a wonderful thing. And then to be able to do it professionally in my day job, we build gardens is what we do and on large scale. And that's just super fun. And we're often trying to find extremely rare, large trees to plant. We started as a tree transplanting business. So we have a whole background in moving large scale trees and on long distances. So that whole world of trying to keep something alive and building something is really fun for me.
Do you have any suggestions for people who are transplanting trees? I know there's some basic tips, but and it's different in different regions, of course, but pre-hydrating a tree is something that gets missed quite a bit. And so, if you're moving a bigger tree, you want to soak that tree, maybe 3 or 4 days ahead of time, and then kind of let it dry out. But you don't want to move a thirsty tree. It won't have any roots to uptake any additional moisture or water. So you want to hydrate it as much as possible. I think that's super missed. I think that's something you don't hear about enough.
Yeah. And then just kind of the aftercare too. When you plant that tree, we don't, so they'll put it on drip or whatever. We don't rely on irrigation for a month. We're hand watering, we do a well around it, and we soak that tree. And we're talking larger trees, maybe 6-inch diameter up to 5 feet in diameter we'll move. And when I say 5 feet in diameter, we're talking about ancient olive trees that aren't super large canopy wise, but they'll get really big trunks on them. And so, you put a little berm around it and you flood that thing maybe once a week.
Great
But it
advice.
also doesn't rain here for 6 months. So,
Oh,
so once a week, if it's not raining,
And we bought a nursery in Oregon. We thought like, oh, it rains there all the time. Like, no, it actually doesn't rain from like June to October. Like, what's going on? Thought there was going to be a lot more rainfall out there than North Carolina. It's not the case.
Yeah,
So-
Buckholz, man, that's just so awesome. That's your guys' deal now. That's such a respectful place, and has always been, from my perspective, that's just a lot of the history of what it is that we're doing as tree collectors has come out of that nursery too.
I appreciate that. We're honored and scared and challenged to carry on that. I feel like a big responsibility to not screw it up, I guess I should say. He's got quite the legacy, and so yeah, it's been challenging. It's interesting. We've done really well with it. We've got a great team out there. It's fun running a business on a separate coast. We've really got a great team in place that makes it pretty easy out there now for us. Talon originally bought that lands about 50 years ago from the Vertrees family, from JD Vertrees' family himself. So it's crazy. There's just kind of always been Japanese maples there. So it's fun. Talon's still involved, and he's even his official 1 year runs out this September, but he's going to still be doing a lot of contract work for us. So Talon's still going to be around in a large capacity for a while.
But you're right. There's
awesome.
There's a lot of history there in the cultivars, and then there's things like one of the world's biggest Makawi Etsubusas, one of the world's biggest Benihimes, and it's just like
there's some crazy plants out there.
There's crazy plants out there that are just insane, and I just look at them when I go out there, and I'm excited because I'm making decisions, but it still doesn't quite feel like it's mine. Like when I walk out there, I'm like, this is like a piece of art.
Yeah, I get to visit this place more than own it. It's kind of what it feels like to me. So you were recently featured in a really cool book. Sarah Malone, who's a good friend of ours, the late great Tom Cox, I know was also in there. He was a good close friend of ours. And I'm stealing this from your Facebook post, but I saw that it was #1 on Amazon in the gardening section recently. So tell us a little bit about this book.
Gardening section. So I have a Facebook group called Advanced Tree Collectors, and I think I was I wanted to have a group that was more for collecting all types of really rare trees, and it started off as just I was a collector at the time and not a propagator yet. I hadn't discovered any new varieties or created any new cultivars. And it ended up attracting some good people and some good attention. And then one day, 4 years ago, an author wrote me and said, "Hey, you're the admin of this group. Do you mind if I, mine your group for some information and some people? I'm trying to write a book. I don't have a publisher yet." And I honestly didn't think that much of it at the time. I was like, okay, yes, of course. And you can interview me too. I'm a tree collector. And so, this is still kind of pandemic time, and we did it over Zoom. And, she interviewed me and she said, "All right, we'll be in touch." And then maybe like 6 months later, she said, "Hey, I had some questions about moving a tree. Do you know anything about moving trees?" And I said, "Well, yeah, my dad's, the OG too." So I got him into an interview with her too, and about moving trees, and we kind of forgot about it for a while. And then maybe a year and a half later, she calls me and she's like, "I can't tell you anything. We got a publisher. It's Random House. I can't tell you anything about the book, but we have one question, and that is that you say you had a tech company and it failed. And that's like a really heavy word, failed. Like, are you okay with us using that?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm totally fine. I mean, that's how you learn in life. And I have no problem with that term. And she pauses. She says, I just want you to know more people will know you from this book than anywhere else in your life. And I'm just like, wait a minute. The weight of that comment just starts sinking. So I start Googling, okay, who is this lady? And, so she's published 13 books. They're all New York Times bestsellers. And I'm like, oh, and The Drunken Botanist, and like, oh, Wicked Plants. Yeah, I've heard of that. And so then all of a sudden I start getting, excited, and butterflies and everything else.
That's so cool.
So as then the book comes out, and I get a pre-release of the book, and she did a chapter with illustrations about transplanting trees and names our company and everything. I was like, whoa, that was unexpected. And then there's a chapter on me. It tells a little bit about my story. And then also people that were in my Facebook group were included, like Janusz in Poland, who just had this wonderful story where his collection is at an elderly home where people in their final years get to enjoy his collection.
Oh, that's cool.
And I just, these wonderful stories. And I think that, Sarah and I are like more conventional collectors, much like, you guys and your clientele. And there were these other really moving stories in there that showed me different ways of how to collect trees that I hadn't really thought of. And some are just documenting trees in their neighborhood, and that's a form of collecting. Somebody created a website for their little town where if you plant a tree, you could just register it on the website at your house or anything, tell a little story about it, or, what it means to you when you planted it. And let's just start documenting these things. A lot of them are going to outlive us. So let's put the history together. And it doesn't have to be a 400-year-old oak tree. It can just be something that means something to you. So the book is really a wonderful collection of people that collect trees. And it's just been an honor to be a part of it. And just riding this wave and doing different interviews has just been a whole new, interesting chapter that I wasn't expecting to have be part of my life. But I'm loving it. It's wonderful.
I love that, man. That's super cool. I started doing this out of some of my greatest failures too. So it's interesting. I don't mind talking about that kind of stuff at all. It's interesting, I think, for other people too. I got laid off from a bank and moved home in my parents' basement. I was like, what am I going to do? It's like 2008. So it's like, it was probably at my worst. I'm like, hey, what are we going to do? Maybe I'll graft some of these trees and see what this is about. So we kind of took over Dad's little hobby from that point forward. So I love that kind of thing. And I love the humility to say, hey, I don't care if you say it failed. I've failed at many things. It's kind of fun what leads our path into horticulture sometimes.
Yeah. And then I do have, kind of an interesting story how I got into introductions, and that is that I was basically late at night, and I'm watching a YouTube film about this Franciscan manzanita that was discovered. And what was happening is on the Golden Gate Bridge, where it touches San Francisco, they redeveloped this whole area. It's called the Presidio. And this just happened in 2010. And while that construction was going on, a guy driving across the Golden Gate Bridge, which is 70,000 people a day for the last 100 years, one guy drives across and looks into the median where they're starting construction. And out of the corner of his eye, he's like, oh, that's the Franciscan manzanita that has been extinct for 70 years.
I love it.
And his name is Dan Glusenkamp. And so he pulls over and they checks it out and they key it out. And they're like, oh yeah, this thing says it's been extinct for 70 years. This is the only one in the world. And have something in such a high profile in the center of 101 in the median right up the Golden Gate Bridge.
That's ridiculous.
And not have been identified before is just so ridiculous. But as soon as I saw that, while I'm watching it, I'm going, I know a tree. I know an oak tree on the side of the road. And I know that its habit is super interesting, very different, and essentially a dwarfed oak tree with no central leader. And it's a blue oak. So the very next morning on my way to work, I stopped at the blue oak. I took a video of myself. I sent it to the International Oak Society, and they called me in about 5 minutes. And they're like, where are you? And, tell me more about this tree. And so then I wanted to, again, save the genetics, right? I was like, I know how to graft maples, so I could graft this too. Well, I find out very quickly grafting oaks is a whole nother ballgame.
Oh man, they will humble you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I don't know what to do. I can't graft them myself. I call everybody I know in my area, in the Bay Area. Nobody grafts oaks. And so I'm running out of ideas. And I actually message Tim and I say, Tim, I need to graft an oak tree. I'm running out of ideas here. What can I do? And he connected me with Pat McCracken.
Nice.
And I sent him some stuff and he tried grafting. The humidity there was not ideal. The blue oak, the Quercus douglasii, needs dry all the time and dry weather, so no moisture. And so we were talking about getting rootstock for this tree, and he said, "Oh, why don't you go to Heritage Seedlings in Oregon to get your rootstock?" So I end up connecting with them. They end up doing my initial grafting. I'm now I'm working with Devil Mountain. I'm on my side here, and they're all friends. But it was this introduction that Tim got me that
cool.
Took me to another introduction to another one that actually got my oaks grafted. And then I got it. It got published in the International Oak Society, got registered. And then there was a big debate between different scientists about what it was probably hybridized with, right? What in the white oak family, because there's a scrub oak nearby, Quercus forbidifolia. There's some other things that could have made it, given it this different habit. And nobody that I had spoken to that's a quercephile really thought it wasn't a hybrid. Everybody thought it was a hybrid. And so I was told, hey, well, why don't you get it genetically tested? So I reached out to a couple different people. It's like 35 grand if you were trying to do like a trademark and these different things. And then I talked to somebody and they said, there's a lab at UC Berkeley that does genetic testing, just got to get a hold of them. So I'm cold calling the school and all these different channels trying to get a hold of this lab. And someone gives me the phone number directly to the lab and I call it and the student answers. And it's like he was playing foosball or something. And he's like, hey, what's up? And I'm just like, hey, is this the lab? And they're like, yeah, there's just 3 students in here hanging out. I'm like, cool, this is what I'm trying to do. And they're like, oh, well, we can't get you in the program. That's like really difficult unless like a senior was to take it on as their project. Hold on, let me talk to somebody. And sure enough, there was a student in there that took
oh
on
my
that
gosh.
project. So we got it fully sequenced and it's 100% Quercus douglasii. It's not a hybrid of any type. There was no other markers in there from other species. So, which is kind of cool. And then some media came out on it. There was a newspaper article, and then the next thing I know, I was kind of in that world, and that was my first registered introduction, and that's a wild selection, right? It's something that existed in the wild without human intervention, and might have actually propagated a similar offspring. There's a chance for that. So that was my first introduction. And then very quickly, I found actually nearby that other oak, there was a gold sport in a valley oak, Quercus lobata. So about 20 feet up in the tree, there's a gold ball growing in there. Not exactly a witch's broom, but I think the lack of photosynthesis kind of gave it this weird form. I had a friend who was an arborist who got a lift out there. We got up in the tree. We took the scion. First, I had to tag it and then come back in January and remember which branch it was and make sure I tagged the right one. And then we sent those cuttings to my already relationship that I had with the blue oak in Oregon. Thank you, Tim. And then we got Dexter's Gold, Quercus lobata Dexter's Gold.
Oh, sweet.
And so once you add the ball rolling, you got the people doing the grafting, what you're trying to identify. It has just scaled from there. And that's my first cultivar, because I would say that's a cultivated variety that wouldn't exist without human interaction. It wouldn't have grown on its own rootstock. And then next I found there was an aerial albino in the redwood, Sequoia sempervirens, and we found cones that were variegated, and I have only those in my house. There's no one else involved. Everybody's trying to find out where I live to get those, because I have about 30 Sequoia sempervirens at my house and no grower has them.
It's pretty sweet.
And I don't know, I'm waiting for some kind of good situation for those, but yeah, it's just kind of taking a life of its own.
That's awesome. I believe, have you found some conifers also that you've
Yeah, I have a Pinus sabiniana witch's broom, which is a really rare tree to have a broom in. The conifer here on the West Coast, I think it's the most common tree, or in the top three is the Pseudotsuga menziesii, the Doug fir, which is not a fir, a true fir. And those have witches' brooms in them all over here. So I've done a few of those. I've never, I gifted them to a client. I found a broom in one of their trees, had it grafted and gifted it to them. But the Pinus sabiniana is the gray pine. It has these nice long needles, and it's kind of a whimsical looking tree. It doesn't really have this classic form. But the broom that I found is just really nice and dense. And so that's made a nice tree, but not in production yet. I need to get some more scions for that and get that to who can grow it. But I think that's definitely a dry weather kind of tree.
Well, you'll have to keep us in mind at Buckholz Nursery now. We're amping up production and we'll start having tons of rootstocks. And that's the type of plants we love doing, are these interesting.
I like the name on that one too. That had the Lord of the Rings inspired.
Yep. Oh yeah. And
cool stuff. It's addictive once you start finding brooms. It's so much fun. It opens up such a. And the guys in Europe really kill me. Like the broom hunters, man. It's so interesting. It's like its own sport, right? It's like the big game sport for nurserymen. It's kind of fun. You get out in some of these areas and find brooms, and I dig it. It's a lot of fun.
I love looking through their Facebook posts and you see their garage, and it's like someone's hanging like a rack from a deer, but they're hanging like the witch's broom that was left after they grafted every piece of scion they could.
Like the trophy buck. Yeah,
it's just so cool.
Sometimes a shotgun is involved.
Right.
I've seen a guy get the shotgun and shoot the broom out of the tree.
They did one here at the Biltmore house that Brian Upchurch grafted. It was a Biltmore blue, and they had a marksman come into the Biltmore house and shoot it out of the tree.
Out of a Pinus strobus.
Yeah. So actually how they got it out was they brought a guy into the Biltmore with a rifle, shot it out.
But I mean, these things you got to be careful about, because some people, you can't. It's dangerous to climb these trees. It's best to put a big long pole up there and try to cut pieces of the broom out.
It's pretty fun with drones now, though. You can go up and look at it.
I've seen some people do it with drones, and that's insane. That's next level.
Need a little drone with a little saw on it. They can come and take it off.
Yeah, and I'd ideally like to leave some of that broom on there still in case my grafts fail or something.
Right. The hardest part, too, sometimes we'll find something amazing, and you go back and the whole tree's gone. It's just, I found, ginkgo brooms at cemeteries in North Carolina, and you go back and you find the GPS markings, you get right back to the spot. You go buy a 60-foot long pole to reach up there to get some cuttings, and the whole tree's gone. You're like, oh my gosh. So that sadly that happens more times than not.
And often too, witches' brooms themselves, the dwarf mutation lends to be something that can break out during an ice storm. And so we get some ice storms in western North Carolina and in North Carolina. And if you get a large snow load or ice storm, the witch's broom is typically the thing that breaks out first. So it's important to try to preserve those genetics when you find them.
So we talked a lot about a ton of different things. I know your background, oaks, conifers, maples. Do you have a favorite category of woody ornamentals that kind of draws you in the most, or are you more, across the board?
Well, so seasonally, we have different, as my emotions change, what trees I'm into change. But, Japanese maples will always just bring me to that happy place. I was in Japan last year for the cherry blossoms and in spring, and we timed it just right. I just went with my mom, just the two of us, for her 70th. It was incredible. And there's a moment, and we didn't know this at the time, but where the cherry blossom are at peak and the Japanese maples are leafing out. And at the beginning, it's just blossoms, there's no leaves. But as it progresses in like this 3-week period, the maples open up. So you get both at the same time, and it blew our minds. And it was incredible. So Japanese maples, for sure, they take me to my happy place. And then oak trees, just a mature oak tree and the branching. And, when you see, it makes you want to climb the tree and just be really close to it. I love oak trees. So I think those would be probably my top two. I'd say oaks and Japanese maples, or Asian maples, I should say.
Those are great categories. What areas in Japan did you get to see?
So Tokyo, Nara, and Kyoto were the main garden places that we went to. And it was, and you know what was actually interesting, a little tip too, is that in Tokyo, you fly into Narita, right, which is the airport town. There's actually a temple and garden in Narita that is really fantastic. And it's the main temple garden of downtown. And I highly suggest don't sleep on Narita. It's actually got some really cool gardens there.
Oh, I love it. We were flirting with the idea of going this fall, and I think it's probably going to get bumped to possibly, if we do get to, maybe a next spring deal. So maybe we'll have to talk about your time frame so we can get some maples in leaf there too. We're flirting with the idea. I know the Maple Society meeting is in England in the fall in 2025. So I already have a big international trip for the fall. So it may be that we have to go in like an early spring setting. I don't know. We're still daydreaming and putting this together. We had a trip planned with Ted Stevens during the pandemic, and it was like, well, wait 15 more days and see if all this ends. And, it ended up not happening. So we were supposed to go back to Japan literally in 2020. It just, that wasn't meant to be. But I've been itching to get back. So it may be a spring trip this time. I've only been in the fall before. Other trips have all been in the fall. So I think seeing the cherry blossoms and some of that spring foliage would be a good reason to make it different.
No, I'm real excited about a lot of the plants you're finding and just that connection we have, because my goal as a nurseryman is to always try to offer unique and interesting things. And when we bought Buchholz, it allows us to sort of look outside of just Japanese maples and be able to, say, hey, what oak rootstock do we need to have around? What beech rootstock do we need to have? What conifer rootstock do we need to have, so that we can really, offer unique and diverse.
There's a
offerings.
lot of cool regional conifer brooms too that don't really get out of those regions. And so I've been really wanting to start collecting some of those different ones and getting them there in production, just because they're, you might find this is a popular broom in Ohio, but it hadn't really reached its potential yet. Things like that. So
there's, for whatever reason, I mean, just West Coast cultivars in general, there's a lot of plants that just don't exist. Let's look at the redbud, the Circes. The Occidentalis, I don't know of a variety or a cultivar. It's all Canadensis. So, to have something that's drought tolerant, that has a cool leaf color, or, is genetically male, or, that would be awesome. And I'm looking for that plant, trust me. And my eyes are out for them in the wild, because I think we need more of that. And I think people would be into it out here. There's just so many of the cool looking cultivars are East Coast plants, and they either don't do that well here, but it would just be nice to have something native here too.
It's one of those deals where it just takes people looking. I mean, people like you are going to find it. It's people out looking. It's landscapers most of the time, right? Because they're interacting with the plants too. And it's guys out there moving plants, interacting with stuff, seeing stuff on the daily. They go to a job and they're like, this looks interesting, right? And that's how everything gets found. But so much great stuff goes by the wayside because somebody doesn't know what they're looking at, and it takes that expert idea, that eye, like you're saying, that you see something and go, well, that looks different. How many people drove by that, right?
My wife, just 2 hours away from us, is a place called Dollywood. And my family loves going and visiting, and whether my wife's always like, hey, let's go listen to music. And I'm like, okay. And on the side of the interstate, driving down the road, we're going, probably 70 miles an hour. And I'm like, hey, look, there was a yellow barked Acer Negundo. And my wife's like, what? And I'm like, we're taking the next exit, coming back around and making a lap back through again. And it was a yellow barked Acer Negundo. And it was winter time. And I was like, okay, time to do some cuttings. And I talked to some other people who propagated them and tried to figure out the best ways to produce it. And, you just never know what you're going to find. You just got to always keep that eye out there and keep looking.
That one's, we've got a tentative working name on of Electric Avenue. But what's funny about the one he found is it has yellow foliage. So it has like a bright yellow foliage in the spring as well. So you get kind of summer gold, spring interest, and then the yellow bark. So it stands out. But you never know what you're going to find in nature. It's fun to find nativars as well out here. It's like this extra little hidden gem. That's so crazy about Japan too. If you get out in the woods, it's like the native plants are Japanese maples and stewardias, and you're just going around like, oh my gosh, is that a cassura tree? Like, it's insane.
And then you do find variations in those too, because when we were just stuck in traffic along the side of the road, we saw a variegated Japanese maple by the side of the interstate. And it was like,
wow,
It's
that's
just a
insane.
seedling. Yeah, it's just a seedling that was in a Reno Nishiki style, but I'm trying to point it out, and I about kill a guy on a bike going by. It's fun. Good times. Well, let us know what's the best way. Definitely shout out your business and where people can find the new book featuring you. And definitely give a plug for your Facebook group so our listeners can go and join there too.
Yeah. So my day job, we're Dexter Estate Landscapes. We just do large scale installs here in the Napa Valley area. But our website, dexterel.com, is a lot of really pretty photos of some awesome gardens. So definitely check that out. And then the book, the author is Amy Stewart. She's an incredible author. She's also an incredible artist, and she did all the illustrations in the book. The book is called The Tree Collectors. It is available pretty much everywhere they sell books. It's through Penguin Publishing Random House. And the audiobook is available, and I think it's also coming out in a bunch of different languages too. So I recommend that. And then the Facebook group is Advanced Tree Collectors, and yeah, don't sleep on the MrMaple groups too. Those are, I love the friends of MrMaple, and it's pretty awesome. I
would love to get out to your area. It's an area of the world I've ever not spent. I don't even count visiting because it's been so brief. I would love to spend more time there. That's something we'll have to come see. And you're always welcome here in North Carolina if you find yourself on the East Coast or at Buckholtz. Definitely come check those out sometime.
Yeah, Lucas.
Awesome. Thanks. And yeah, if you drink wine, I got the hookups, all the wineries, free wine tasting.
Oh, nice. We'll come visit for sure. It sounds like a good time.
Lucas,
awesome.
Thanks so much, man.
Guys.
Thanks for hopping on here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too.
All right, man. Thanks. Take care. All right, guys, that's it for today. Make sure to subscribe to the MrMaple Show. Give us a 5-star review on any of your favorite podcast platforms. That helps people find us. You can also find us on YouTube. We put 7 days a week content out, and these podcasts do air Sunday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern if you want to see the video component.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.